My wife received a letter from herself on a Tuesday morning. There was no return address. No stamp from another state. Nothing unusual about the envelope except for one thing. The handwriting on the front was unmistakably hers. She opened it at the kitchen table while I was making coffee. She read the first 3 lines, then she stopped breathing. I turned around and saw the color drain from her face. "What is it?" She didn't answer. She simply handed me the letter with a trembling hand. At the top was a date 10 years in the future. Underneath it was the warning. "If you're reading this, don't let Daniel get on the flight." I read it twice. Then I looked at Emily. "What the hell is this?" She shook her head. "I don't know." "That's your handwriting." "I know." "No. I mean exactly your handwriting." "I know, Daniel." She looked terrified. Not confused. Not surprised. Terrified. I put the coffee mug down and took the letter from her. The paper was ordinary printer paper, folded in half. There were only a few paragraphs. The first one told us not to trust anyone who claimed the letter was fake. The second told Emily not to tell anyone about it. The third was the part that made my stomach tighten. "Daniel cannot take the Friday morning flight. If he boards that plane, you will spend the rest of your life believing you caused what happens next." I looked at the date again. It was 10 years from that Tuesday. 10 years and 3 days, to be exact. I checked the bottom of the page. There was one final sentence. "You will think this is about Daniel. It isn't." Then the letter ended. No signature. No explanation. Just Emily's handwriting. 10 years in the future. I looked at my wife. "Okay." She stared at me. "Okay? We need to figure out who did this." "You don't believe it's me?" "I believe you didn't write it." She swallowed. "But it's my handwriting." "I know. And that date." "I know." She looked down at the letter. "Daniel, what if I did?" I didn't have an answer. Our flight was scheduled for Friday morning. We were flying to Denver for my brother's wedding. The tickets had been booked almost 4 months earlier. Our seats were 18A and 18 billions. We had already checked the weather. Our hotel was booked. Our rental car was booked. I'd even taken Monday off so we could stay an extra day. It was the kind of trip you make when life has been boring for a while, and you finally have something to look forward to. And now my wife had received a letter apparently written by herself 10 years from now telling me not to get on the plane. I sat across from her. "Let's start with the obvious." She nodded. "Someone knows about our flight." "Lots of people know." "Your brother." "My coworkers." "My family." "Our neighbor." "Exactly." "Someone could be trying to scare us." Emily stared at the letter. "But why use my handwriting?" "Maybe they stole something with your handwriting on it." "Like what?" "I don't know. A notebook, a card, anything." She shook her head. "That doesn't explain the future date." "Maybe the date is part of the trick." She looked at me. "Then why write it 10 years ahead?" "To make us think it's from the future." Neither of us spoke. That explanation sounded ridiculous the moment I said it, but I wanted it to be true. Because the alternative was worse. I checked the envelope again. There was a postmark. Our city. That made me feel slightly better. If someone had actually sent this from 10 years in the future, it shouldn't have been possible. If someone had mailed it from across the country, I could at least imagine some elaborate setup. But this had been mailed locally. Someone had put it into the postal system here. That meant there was a person. A real person. And if there was a person, we could find them. At least, that's what I told myself. Emily picked up the letter. "Look at this." She pointed to one of the words. "What's wrong?" "I don't spell this word this way." I frowned. "You just said it's your handwriting." "It is." "Then how can you not spell it like this?" "Because I always shorten it." She grabbed a notebook and wrote the same sentence. Then she held both pages next to each other. The handwriting matched almost perfectly, but the spelling was different. The letter used an older spelling she'd stopped using years ago. I remembered that because I'd teased her about it when we were dating. "You used to spell it that way." She looked at me. "I know. So whoever wrote this knew how you used to write." She didn't respond. Then she said quietly, "Or I did." I hated hearing her say that. Don't do that. Do what? Talk like you know this is from the future. I don't know what it is. Good. She folded the letter. Then let's act like normal people. Agreed. We started investigating every normal possibility we could think of. I checked our email accounts. Nothing. Our airline account showed no suspicious activity. Our credit cards were fine. Our phones hadn't been replaced. Our house cameras hadn't been accessed. Emily checked her work laptop. No unusual logins. I searched our social media. We hadn't posted anything about the flight. Then I found something. 3 weeks earlier, Emily had sent a message to her mother's sister. The message mentioned the Denver trip. Her aunt had never responded. I called her. She didn't answer. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that when I texted her asking if she'd told anyone about our flight, she replied almost immediately. No. Why? I didn't explain. I put my phone down. Emily was watching me. What did she say? She didn't tell anyone. Emily sighed. Then we're back where we started. I looked at the letter. No. What? There's one person who knew about the flight who isn't on our list. Who? I looked at her. You. She frowned. I know. You could have written it. She stared at me. Then, surprisingly, she nodded. That's the first explanation that actually makes sense. I laughed. You're serious? If I'm sleepwalking or something, you can't sleepwalk and mail a letter. Maybe I wrote it weeks ago and forgot. That date is 10 years from now. Maybe I wrote the date as part of some joke. Would you then forget doing it? She didn't answer. I looked at the clock. It was almost noon. We're going to the post office. The postal clerk couldn't tell us much. The envelope had entered the system locally. That was all. There was no tracking information, no camera footage we could access, no sender identification, nothing. We left frustrated. On the drive home, Emily didn't say a word. Then, about 10 minutes from the house, she spoke. I want to cancel your ticket. I glanced at her. No. Yes. Emily, Daniel, if there's even a 1% chance that letter is real, why would you get on the plane? Because there's a 99% chance somebody is messing with us. And if you're wrong? I didn't answer. She pulled out her phone. I'm canceling it. I reached over. Wait. She stopped. I looked at her. I'll cancel it. She stared at me. Why? Because if we leave it active, we'll spend the next 3 days wondering whether we're being stupid. She nodded. We canceled my ticket. Emily kept hers. Neither of us knew why. Maybe because we were still trying to convince ourselves the warning wasn't real. Maybe because canceling my ticket was easier than admitting we were afraid. That evening, we ordered takeout. We tried watching television. Neither of us paid attention. At around 10:30, Emily went upstairs. I stayed downstairs, cleaning the kitchen. Then I heard her call my name. Daniel. I ran upstairs. She was standing in the bedroom doorway. What happened? She pointed toward the hallway. There was another envelope on the floor. My stomach dropped. No. Emily didn't move. That's impossible. I walked toward it. Same paper. Same handwriting. No return address. I looked at our security camera app. The hallway camera had been offline for 11 minutes. Elva. I looked at Emily. Did you put this here? She shook her head. Did you? No. I picked it up. The envelope was sealed. I didn't open it immediately. Instead, I checked every window. Locked. Every door. Locked. I checked the cameras. The system had automatically restarted. There was no footage of anyone entering. I opened the envelope. One sheet. 3 lines. The first said, "You canceled his ticket." The second said, "Good." The third said, "You think you're saving him. You're actually saving yourself." Emily sat down on the bed. I read the sentence again. Then I looked at her. What does that mean? She shook her head. I don't know. Whoever wrote this knows we canceled the ticket. She looked at the envelope. They knew before we did. That thought changed everything. Because we hadn't told anyone. Not my brother. Not our families. Not our friends. Nobody. The only people who knew were me and Emily. I checked my phone. No suspicious activity. Then I noticed something. The second letter had one tiny mark in the bottom corner. A blue ink dot. I turned the page over. Nothing. Emily took it from me. I've seen this before. Where? She didn't answer. She stood up and walked to her desk. Then she opened a drawer. She pulled out an old photograph. I recognized the picture. It was Emily's mother standing outside a storage facility. I'd seen it years earlier, but I'd never noticed the tiny blue dot in the corner. Where did you get that? It was in my mother's paperwork. I looked at the photograph. What's the storage place?
Westlake. I stared at her.
Westlake what? Westlake Self-Storage. She turned the photograph over. On the back was a handwritten number. I felt a chill. That's a locker.
Yes.
Did your mom have one? I don't know. You don't know? She died before I started asking questions about this stuff. I took the photograph. When was this taken? She looked at the date. 11 years ago. Before we met.
Yes.
I looked at the picture again. Her mother was standing in front of a row of storage units. She was holding a small metal box. I turned the photograph over. There was writing underneath the number. I had never seen it before. Neither had Emily. It said, "Wait until he knows." I looked at my wife. Who's he? She shook her head. I don't know. Could it be your father?
No.
Then who? She looked at the photograph. I don't know. We spent the next 2 hours going through every piece of paperwork Emily had from her mother. We found insurance documents, tax records, old medical bills, a handwritten grocery list, nothing about the storage locker. Then Emily found a folded receipt. It was from Westlake Self-Storage.
Locker 214.
The date was 11 years old. The name on the receipt wasn't her mother's. It was Emily's. She stared at it. That can't be right.
Why?
I've never rented a storage unit. Maybe your mother rented it in your name.
Why?
I don't know. She turned the receipt over. There was another handwritten message. This one was shorter. Do not open until Friday. Emily looked at me. I felt my stomach tighten.
Friday?
She nodded. Our canceled flight. The locker expiration. The letters. Everything kept pointing to the same day. But why? We called Westlake Storage. The woman who answered confirmed that locker 214 existed. She wouldn't tell us who had access to it. I explained that we had found paperwork indicating it belonged to my wife. She asked for identification. We drove there the next morning. At the office, the manager checked the records. She looked confused. There's something strange about this. What? The account is under your wife's name. Emily stared at her. But I've never rented it. The manager looked at the computer. It has been paid automatically for years. How many years? She hesitated. My skin prickled. 10 years?
Yes.
Who pays it? I can't tell you. Can you tell us when it was last paid? She checked. Last Friday. Emily looked at me. Whoever is paying for it is still paying for it. The manager looked between us. Do you want access?
Yes.
She frowned. There's a problem. What? The contract says the unit cannot be accessed until Friday.
Why?
I don't know. Who put that restriction there? She checked the file. Then she looked at us with a strange expression. Your wife did. Emily went completely still. I did what? The manager turned the computer toward us. There was a note attached to the account. It contained instructions. The manager read them aloud. Do not release unit access before August 14th. That was Friday. Emily whispered. That's impossible. The manager looked uncomfortable. There's also a second note. What does it say? She read it. Only release the unit if Daniel Mercer is present. I felt like someone had punched me. How long has that note been there? 10 years. Neither of us spoke. The manager printed the paperwork. We left with copies. Outside, Emily sat in the passenger seat staring straight ahead. I started the car. Are you okay?
No.
What are you thinking? That somehow, 10 years ago, someone knew your name. I looked at her. Maybe your mother knew me. She never met you. Then who? Emily looked at me. I think that's what the letters are trying to tell us. We decided to wait until Friday. Not because we wanted to. Because we had no choice. The manager wouldn't give us access before then. We spent Thursday night awake. At 3:17 a.m., my phone buzzed. An email.
No sender name.
No subject. There was one attachment.
A photograph.
I opened it. It was our house. Taken from across the street. The timestamp said it had been taken 20 minutes earlier. I looked out the bedroom window. The street was empty. Emily woke up. What happened? I showed her. She stared at the photograph. Then she noticed something.
Zoom in. I did.
There was a person standing behind the upstairs curtain.
Me.
Except I was asleep beside her. She looked at me. I looked at the photograph. Neither of us moved. Then another email arrived. This one contained only a sentence. Friday is not the day Daniel dies. I felt some relief. Then the next line appeared. It is the day Emily disappears. I looked at my wife. She was already crying. The next morning, we drove to Westlake Storage. It was Friday. The sky was gray. Neither of us had mentioned the flight. Neither of us needed to. We parked outside the facility. The manager was waiting. She handed Emily a key.
Locker 214.
Emily stared at it. Who gave you this? The manager shook her head. It was mailed to us yesterday. By who? We don't know. The key had one number engraved on it. We walked to the locker. Neither of us spoke. Emily inserted the key. The lock clicked. She opened the door. Inside were dozens of cardboard boxes. Every box had a date. Every date was in the future. 10 years, 8 years, 6 years. Some were only months away. And every label was written in Emily's handwriting. I reached for the nearest box. Emily grabbed my arm.
Daniel.
What? She pointed to the far wall. There was one large black box sitting by itself. No date.
No label.
Just my name.
Daniel.
I walked toward it. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. Emily stood behind me.
Don't open it. Why?
I don't know. I looked at the box. There was a photograph taped to the top.
I peeled it off.
It showed Emily standing outside our house. She looked older. Much older. The photograph was dated 10 years in the future. I turned it over. On the back, in Emily's handwriting, were 7 words. Daniel, if you find this, I'm already gone. Emily made a small sound behind me. I turned. She was staring at the photograph. What's wrong? She pointed at the picture. At first, I didn't understand.
Then I saw it.
Behind the older version of Emily was our house. And on the porch was the same small metal box from her mother's photograph. The box we just found. The box I was holding. I looked down at the black box. There was a second message, written underneath my name. Do not open this, unless you are ready to learn why the flight mattered. Emily stepped backward.
Daniel.
I looked at her. What? She pointed to the inside wall of the locker. There was another photograph taped there. This one showed our front door. The date was 3 days after Friday. And written across the photograph were 4 words. She's not coming home. I turned back toward the black box. Then I heard something behind us.
A metallic click.
The locker door had moved. Someone was standing outside. And before either of us could turn around, Emily whispered the one thing that made my blood run cold. I know that sound. I turned toward Emily. What sound? She was staring at the locker door. That click. The person outside moved. The metal door shifted another inch. Emily grabbed my arm.
Don't open it. Why?
My mom's storage unit had a lock like that. I looked at the door. What does that mean? It means somebody just locked us in. The door slammed shut. I heard the latch engage. For about 3 seconds, neither of us moved. Then I ran toward it. I pulled the handle. Nothing.
Daniel.
I'm trying.
He pulled harder.
It didn't move. There was no panic in Emily's voice anymore. It was something worse. Recognition. She knew something about that sound that I didn't. I turned around. Emily, what aren't you telling me? She shook her head. I don't know. You just said you recognized it. I recognized the lock. From your mom's storage unit?
Yes.
What happened there? She looked at the black box. I don't know. I walked back toward her. You do know. I remember being there. When? I was 17.
I stared at her.
You told me you'd never been to Westlake. I said I didn't remember being here. That's not the same thing. She looked embarrassed. I didn't know if the memory was real. What memory? She took a breath. My mom brought me here once. When? About 10 years before she died.
Why?
I don't know. Emily, she told me to stay in the car. I looked at the locker door. What did you hear? That sound? She pointed at the lock. That exact metallic click. Then she looked at me. And after it happened, my mom came back to the car carrying that box. I looked down at the black box. You've seen this before? She nodded.
I think so.
I suddenly understood why she had looked so frightened when we'd first opened the locker. She wasn't recognizing a random sound. She was remembering something she'd spent years trying to forget. Why didn't you tell me? Because I thought it was a dream. What happened after your mom came back? She was crying.
Why?
I don't know. Did she say anything? Emily closed her eyes. Then she whispered. She said, if anybody asks, you've never been here. A noise came from the other side of the locker. 3 knocks. Emily grabbed my hand. Don't answer. The person knocked again. Then, a voice came through the metal. Emily?
She froze.
I looked at her. Who is that? She didn't answer. The voice came again. Emily, I know you're in there. It was an older woman's voice.
Home.
Not threatening. Emily's face went completely white. That can't be. What? She whispered. That's my mother's voice. I felt a chill move through me. Her mother had been dead for years. The voice outside knocked once more. Emily, open the door. Emily backed away.
No.
The voice said her name again. This time, I heard something strange. A recording. The sound was slightly distorted. It wasn't a person standing outside. It was a speaker. Someone had recorded Emily's mother. I looked at the ceiling. There was a tiny black camera mounted in the corner. Someone had been watching us. I pulled out my phone and called 911. Before I could explain, the locker door suddenly opened. Nobody was there. The hallway was empty. At the far end, a security door was swinging shut. I ran after whoever had been there.
Daniel.
I stopped. Emily was standing beside the black box. Don't leave me. I turned around. She was crying. I walked back. The hallway was empty. Whoever had been outside was gone. We left the locker immediately. The storage manager was still in the office. When I told her someone had locked us inside, she looked genuinely shocked. That shouldn't be possible. Someone just did it. She checked the security system. Then her face changed. That's strange. What? The exterior cameras were disabled. By who? She shook her head. I don't know. Can you check who has access to locker 214? She pulled up the account. There were only 2 authorized names. Emily. And her mother. I stared at the screen. That isn't possible. The manager looked uncomfortable. Her mother died?
Yes.
When? 7 years ago. She looked at the account. Then someone has been using her access credentials. Can you tell us when? She hesitated. Every Friday. My stomach tightened. For how long? 10 years. Emily looked at me. 10 years. The exact same period the letters had been dated into the future. We took photographs of the records. Then, we left. We didn't go home. We went to a hotel. I didn't trust our house anymore. I didn't trust the cameras. I didn't trust the letters. And after what happened in that locker, I wasn't even sure I trusted the walls around us. Emily sat on the edge of the hotel bed. The black box was on the table between us. She hadn't touched it since we left. Open it, I said. She looked at me.
No.
We need to know what's inside. That's what the letters warned us about. Then maybe that's exactly why we need to. She looked at the box. I'm scared.
So am I.
I sat beside her. But we're already in this. She nodded. Slowly, she reached for the box. There was a small keyhole. The key from the storage locker fit. She turned it. The lock clicked. Emily flinched. I opened the lid. Inside were envelopes, photographs, a small, digital recorder, a USB drive, and a stack of handwritten pages. The first page had one sentence. Read these in order. I picked up the first envelope. It was dated 10 years earlier. Not 10 years in the future. 10 years earlier. I looked at Emily. That's different. She nodded. I opened it. Inside was a letter from her mother. The handwriting wasn't Emily's. It was older.
Here.
But definitely her mother's. The letter explained that Emily's mother had discovered something about a man she called the driver. She never named him. She wrote that the man had been following her family for years. She believed he was connected to someone who wanted access to a large amount of money. I looked at Emily. Your mom was being followed? I didn't know. The letter continued. She wrote that she'd been receiving threats. She had also become convinced someone was monitoring her phone. Then came something that made me stop. She wrote, if anything happens to me, Daniel must never board the Friday flight. I looked at Emily. She was staring at me. Why would your mother know my name? I don't know. The next page answered that. Her mother had been investigating Emily's future husband. Not because she knew who he would be. Because she had created a contingency plan. She had discovered that a person connected to the family was using airline records and financial databases to target people. She feared that one day Emily would unknowingly marry someone connected to the situation. It sounded insane, until I reached the next page. There was a photograph. It showed me.
A lot older.
Not younger. Me, as I looked now. Standing outside my office. The photograph had been taken 6 months before Emily and I met.
I stared at it.
That can't be me. Emily took it. She looked at the picture.
It is.
How did your mother have this? I don't know. I looked at the date. It was 11 years old. 1 year before I met Emily.
I felt sick.
Then I noticed something behind me in the photograph.
A dark blue sedan.
The same kind we'd seen outside our house. I grabbed the photo. That's the car. Emily looked at it. The one from our security footage.
Yes.
I turned the photograph over. There was a note. Do not assume the person driving this car is the person you should fear.
I sat back.
Every time we thought we were getting closer, the story changed. I picked up the digital recorder.
It had one file.
The date was 10 years old. I pressed play. Emily's mother's voice filled the room. If you're hearing this, Emily, I'm probably gone. Emily covered her mouth. Her mother's voice continued. I need you to understand something. I didn't put these letters here because I knew the future. I looked at Emily. The recording continued. I put them here because I knew someone would try to make you believe I had. I stopped the recording. Emily stared at me. What does that mean? I don't know. I pressed play again. Her mother continued. I found out that someone had been forging documents in Emily's name. They had access to her handwriting from school records, medical forms, and old letters. They wanted her to believe that she had agreed to things she never agreed to. Emily's face changed. The letters, she whispered. Keep listening. Her mother's voice continued. The future dates are part of the deception. Whoever controls the documents wants you to believe the messages came from a future version of Emily. They don't. I stopped breathing. The letters weren't from the future. Someone had created the appearance that they were. But who? Her mother answered the question. The person doing this knows Daniel's name. I looked at Emily. Her mother's voice became quieter. He knows, because he has been watching him. The recording ended. Neither of us spoke. For several seconds, the hotel room was completely silent. Then Emily said, We need to go back. To the locker?
Yes. Why?
Because if my mom knew the letters weren't from the future, she must have left proof of who created them. We returned to Westlake before sunrise. The manager let us into the office. I asked her about the person using Emily's mother's credentials. She pulled up the access logs. There was a name attached to every entry. Not her mother's. A third name.
Michael Grant.
Emily frowned. Who is that? The manager searched. He was listed as an authorized representative. Do you know him?
No.
I searched the name online. There were several people with it. Then I found a photograph. Emily stared at the screen. That man. What? He was at my mother's funeral. I looked at the photograph. It was the same man who had been standing beside the dark blue sedan in one of the old pictures. I remembered him. I'd seen him at Emily's mother's funeral years ago. I had assumed he was a family friend, but now we knew something else. He had access to the locker. He had access to Emily's mother's records. And he had been watching me before Emily and I even met. We called the police. This time, they took us seriously. Detective Harris, the same officer who had reviewed our camera footage, came to the storage facility. He listened to everything. Then he looked at the photographs. You said this man has been accessing the locker for 10 years?
Yes.
Do you have proof? The manager showed him the records. Harris photographed them. Then he asked us to stay outside while he searched the unit. About 20 minutes later, he came out carrying a folder. Inside were dozens of documents. Fake airline reservations, copies of our driver's licenses, bank statements, medical records, and something else. A complete file on me, dating back to before I met Emily.
I felt sick.
Why me? Harris looked at the documents. We're going to find out. Then he found the connection. Michael Grant wasn't a random investigator. He had worked for an insurance company. The same insurance company Emily worked for. I looked at her. You know him? She shook her head.
No.
Harris found something in the file. A termination letter. Michael had been fired 12 years earlier for unauthorized access to customer records. He'd apparently disappeared afterward. But he'd never stopped watching certain people. Emily was one of them. Her mother had discovered him. She had built the storage locker as a dead man's switch. The letters were part of that plan. Not future letters. Prepared letters. She had deliberately copied Emily's handwriting. She had also collected enough examples of Emily's writing to make the letters convincing. But there was still one question. Why did some of the letters contain information that only Emily and I knew? Harris answered that too. The locker contained recordings. Hundreds of hours.
Conversation.
Phone calls. Old voicemails. Emails. Someone had been monitoring us. The second letter had known we canceled my ticket because Michael had access to the airline account. The photograph of our house had come from a hidden camera. The blue sedan had been watching us. The entire future mystery had been carefully constructed from information Michael had collected. But there was still the flight. Why had my wife received a warning specifically about that flight? Detective Harris found the answer in another folder. There had been a scheduled maintenance issue with the aircraft. Nothing that guaranteed a crash. Nothing that meant the plane was going down. But there was an investigation into a potential mechanical problem. Michael had somehow obtained preliminary information about it. He had used the information to make the warning believable. If we canceled the flight, he knew we'd be frightened enough to follow the rest of his instructions. If we took it, he could use the information to make us believe he had supernatural knowledge. Either way, he controlled the narrative. But then Harris found something that changed the situation again. The flight had never been the real target. I was. Michael had planned to use the canceled trip to separate us. He expected Emily to become obsessed with the letters. He expected me to investigate. And he expected us to go to the storage locker, because the storage locker contained evidence he needed to recover. The entire mystery had been designed to lead us there. I looked at Emily. Your mother knew he would do this. She nodded. She planned for him. Then, I remembered the photograph. The one showing our front door. The date 3 days after Friday. She's not coming home. Harris looked at me. What date was on it? I told him. He checked the file. Then he looked at Emily. That's the date your mother scheduled the final release of the locker. Emily stared at him. What does that mean? It means the phrase wasn't predicting your disappearance. I looked at the photograph. It meant she wasn't coming home. Emily understood first. Her mother's final plan had always been built around disappearing herself. She had known Michael was watching. She had staged her death differently than we had believed. Harris later confirmed that there were irregularities in her mother's death records. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to suggest she'd spent months preparing to vanish. She hadn't wanted Emily involved. She had wanted her daughter to have a normal life. But she'd also known that if Michael ever came after Emily, someone needed to leave a trail. That's what the locker was. A trail. The phrase, "she's not coming home," wasn't about Emily. It referred to her mother. The photograph had been created as part of the contingency plan. The date 3 days after Friday was the date her mother intended to disappear. The letters were supposed to make sense only after the locker was opened, and the black box contained the final evidence. There was one last envelope. Emily opened it herself. Inside was a letter dated 10 years earlier. It began, "Emily, if you're reading this, then the plan worked badly." She laughed through her tears. Then, she kept reading. Her mother explained that she had spent years trying to expose Michael. She had deliberately created false trails and future-dated documents to make it harder for him to understand what was real. She knew he'd eventually discover the locker. She knew he'd try to use Emily. And she knew the only way to protect her was to make Michael believe that the future itself was sending warnings. At the bottom was one final sentence. "Daniel is not the danger." Emily stopped. She looked at me, then continued. "Daniel is the person I hope you can trust when everything else becomes impossible to believe." She began crying. I put my hand over hers. The final page contained a list of names. Michael's name was at the top. Under it were dates, account numbers, access records, and copies of messages proving he'd been monitoring the family. There was enough evidence to put everything together. Michael was arrested 2 weeks later. He was charged with multiple offenses related to unauthorized access, stalking, identity theft, fraud, and surveillance. The investigation took months. There were things we learned that I still don't like thinking about. How long he'd been watching. How much information he'd collected. How many people he'd manipulated. How close he'd come to convincing Emily that she couldn't trust her own memory. But there was one question I kept asking. Why had he let us find the locker? The answer came from the police. He hadn't intended for us to open the black box. He intended to arrive after we'd opened it. He wanted the evidence gone. The person who had been outside the locker that morning wasn't Michael. It was an investigator working with him. The voice recording of Emily's mother had been played through the speaker to frighten us into leaving. The metallic click Emily recognized wasn't the sound of some supernatural mechanism. It was the same magnetic lock her mother had used on the old unit. Emily remembered it because she'd heard it when she was 17. The person outside knew that. He had expected the memory to frighten her. Instead, it gave us the clue we needed. The letters weren't from the future. They were warnings from the past. And somehow, that was more frightening. Because it meant someone had spent 10 years planning for the exact moment when we'd need them. A few months later, Emily and I went back to the storage facility. The unit was empty. Completely empty. The manager had replaced the lock. We stood there together. Emily looked at the floor. "This is where I thought I was going to disappear." I took her hand. "You didn't." "No." She smiled. "I almost believed I would." "So did I." We drove home afterward. The house looked different. Not because anything had changed. Because we had. We replaced the cameras, changed our locks, closed our old accounts, moved some things. But we didn't leave. Emily didn't want to. "This is our home," she said. "And I don't want someone else's fear deciding where we live." She was right. There was one final thing left. The first letter. The one that had started everything. We had kept it in a safe. Months after Michael's arrest, Detective Harris returned it to us. Emily held it for a long time. Then, she looked at me. "Do you want to burn it?" I thought about it. Why? "Because it saved us." She smiled. "Technically, my mom saved us. Technically, she left us a very confusing set of instructions." Emily laughed. It was the first time she'd laughed about any of it. She put the letter back in the safe. Then she stopped. "Daniel?" "Yeah." "There was one thing my mom was wrong about." "What?" "She said the letters weren't from the future." I looked at her. That's what she wrote. I know. She picked up the first letter. Maybe they weren't. What do you mean? She turned it over. On the back, beneath the original writing, was a faint line we'd never noticed. It said, "Some warnings don't need to come from the future to save it." I stared at the sentence. Emily smiled. I think that's the whole point. Maybe it was. Maybe the future wasn't some fixed thing waiting for us. Maybe it was just the result of thousands of small decisions. Canceling a flight. Opening a door. Trusting the wrong person. Listening when something felt wrong. And maybe the strangest part of everything was that the letters never actually predicted our future. They changed it. The flight we didn't take never became the event that defined our lives. The woman who was supposed to disappear came back into our story through the evidence she left behind. The man who spent 10 years watching us finally lost control of the one thing he'd counted on. And Emily stopped being afraid of her own handwriting. She started using it again. For grocery lists, birthday cards, little notes on the refrigerator. Normal things. Things that belonged to the present. A year after everything happened, I found her at the kitchen table one morning. There was an envelope in front of her. For 1 second, my heart stopped. Then I saw her smiling. Relax, she said. What is it? She turned the envelope around. It was a birthday card. She'd written it herself. For you. I laughed. You almost killed me. I know. I opened it. Inside was one sentence. I'm glad you got off the flight. I looked at her. That doesn't even make sense. She smiled. It does to me. I folded the card and put it in my desk. I don't know whether my wife's mother knew exactly what would happen when she created that locker. I don't know whether she expected us to find every letter. I don't know whether she ever imagined Daniel and Emily would be standing together years later, reading the warnings she had hidden for us. But I do know this. The letters were never really about seeing the future. They were about refusing to let someone else decide it for us. And every time I think about that Tuesday morning, when Emily opened an envelope written in a handwriting that looked like hers and told me not to board a plane, I remember how impossible it felt. At the time, I thought the scariest question was how my wife could have written a letter 10 years in the future. I was wrong. The scariest question was why someone had spent 10 years making sure we believed she had.